until Commissioner Peacock starts, or we can wait. He emailed to say he's running late, but he didn't say how long. Commissioners, are you okay with that?
I'm okay. I'm not here to be a chair.
Yes. Okay. Fine. So we will actually get started on public testimony. And we will actually call the meeting to order first at 6:38 p.m. And Ms. Carter, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
We will give you 3 minutes to speak. And give a timer on there. And we will tell you when the timer is done, and then you can just stay up here and answer questions. That would be great. Whenever you're ready.
I am ready. Good evening, everybody. I actually don't have a complaint today. I actually have what I'd like to put on the table as possible recommendation for how community-based organizations and schools could work in partnership. So I had this dream where the schools are actually vetted for the community-based organizations that are funded through the DME. And then once the schools are vetted to see which schools might be available for summer, then organizations that are funded could be placed in those schools, as opposed to the system that we currently have now, which is Thomas and Franken, God bless her soul, sends out a list of schools, and then community-based organizations go and try to get the principals to allow us to use the schools. That system is broken, it does not work. So maybe we could try having Thomas and Franken's office, which I don't know what office that is, actually vet those schools, since she has a relationship with those principals, and to determine which schools will be available for the summer. Some of the schools, I'm speaking specifically of Ward 8 now, some of those schools are just large, like Hart, like Ballou, Anacostia now has a low student population, so they have a lot of space. They can sometimes house 2 or 3 community-based organizations over the summer, because some of us are working with kids for only 4 hours or 5 hours. You know, we can come in shifts. There's many, things that can be worked out. So my recommendation is that Thomas and Franken's office vet those schools to determine which schools will be available for the summer, and then either assign us or say, here's the schools that we know will be available. Go and get your realty application signed by the principal, and those other 600 steps that come along with that. And I still got 41 seconds. 40 seconds. So I'm going to use my 30 seconds to say thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Carter. Are there any questions from commissioners? Let's start within the room first. Any?
I have one question. Just so if the proposal would be to improve the way that CBOs are approaching schools, so that you're not in a guessing game of who's actually going to make their school available. So if the vetting were done on the front end and you knew availability, would you then are you asking TCPS or DME to do the matching, or would you still want to say, I would prefer Hart over Blue, or like, how much do the CBOs want to hand over the whole matching process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that allow the CBO to determine, because what's happening is that if you're working, say, in 762 PSA, 762 or 702 or yeah, some of those numbers, then you'll have young people who probably live within close proximity to that school, so they can walk to you and then walk to the school and then walk home. And DME may not be able to determine that.
Yeah.
We would be able to.
So you're still looking for CBOs to have a role in sort of the matching in some way, whatever we work out, but it's mostly that availability piece that you're
Exactly.
okay.
Oh, I almost got the extension. I know my 3 minutes is up, but can I answer her question a little bit? Thank you. The extension of that is that in the summertime, there's just awful amount of young people, well, awful maybe is not the right word, but there's a lot of young people who are in the streets after OST time in the summer. So it would be really good too if the schools could keep those doors open. And I know a lot of CBOs, I'm including myself in that, because I have no life, that would be really happy to program up to at least 7, 8 o'clock at night to have a safe place for those young people to go to. I know my daughter and I, we grew up in Virginia. My daughter grew up in Virginia. And they would, in Arlington, Virginia, and we would open the churches on the weekends to have the kids could have places to go. I don't know if the churches would be amenable to that, but certainly the schools could open their doors on the weekend, and we could, since we're now being funded, we could use that money on the weekends to provide that weekend programming that's needed to have those young people a safe place to go on the weekends.
Thank you.
What do the schools require? Is there some type of liability clauses? Is there a cost associated with renting the facilities? What's the overhead?
Right, and so that is, basically one of the challenges for the school is who's going to pay for security, who's going to pay for somebody to come and clean up the mess, after you guys leave. And, I can answer that question 2 ways, and that's because I'm old-fashioned. One, you give us some brooms and some dustpans and some mops, and the kids clean up the mess that they made. I'm big on that. And, you're welcome. And that's the one thing. But in terms of security, I think that, if you have 2 or 3 CBOs, using a building, then that security expense becomes a shared expense that we should have to share, and we should pay for it. I feel like we should pay for it because we're being funded. We can, pay for that.
Okay, but the school has a standard policy in place in regard to leasing out their spaces.
They have a process.
Yes, process.
Yes, for approval.
Can I also just address that a little bit? They do have a standard process, and the answer is always no. So, yeah, go get your facility usage application, fill it out, email it to us, but the answer is always no. They're not, unless you make it. We just had a meeting with the superintendent for Cluster 7, who's over Ballou and some other school and others. And they have this thing now where they want to give complete control over what happens in the school or who comes into the school to the principal, which is okay. But most of the time, the principals don't live in the city. They don't live in the ward. So they're, kind of detached a little bit from the need of, even though they're right there in the school, they're a little detached. So, no, I'm not putting them down.
Any questions on the phone?
No, I just have a comment with Commissioner Meeting. I'm not going to say that the principals, even though they have the power to make that decision, what time they want the doors open and closed in reference to the program that they're housing at their school, but I think it's more so a personal relationship that the CEO, depending on how long they've been in the community with the schools, it's a personal relationship that the head of that organization has to have with the principal, because a lot of times it becomes bureaucratic because the principal has to get approved by DCPS for the time that he or she has to have their doors open. So I think it's more of a personal relationship thing. And that would be a conversation that the CBOs, the heads of the CBOs, or the heads of those CBOs need to have with the principal and somebody possibly at the deputy head office. That would just help out in the process a little bit so that they won't
So, yeah.
no, like you said.
Mila, and so this is Maggie from the DC Alliance of Youth Advocates, and I'm chair of the Coordination and Collaboration Committee. And this is something that's been identified as a priority, and it's an area where folks can lend some time and thought expertise. We would really welcome their participation and appreciation in the process of scheduling our May 1.
Thank you, Maggie. So you're encouraging people to join the Coordination and Collaboration Committee because this is a topic under discussion and where some of the details behind that.
Correct.
And then for the commissioners on the phone, can you mute your phone for the background noise?
So I had a comment as well, just from an organizational standpoint. I understand DCPS's process that they have in place because as an organization, we also have to go through that process. So it seems like it's double layered. So you get a blanket certificate from DCPS and you get vetted, and it says you can be in any school you want, but you have to get permission from the principals. And then when you go through that process with principals, whether you have personal relationships or not, especially in the communities in which, specifically East of the River, there's a lot of turnover, specifically at schools. So you could have a great relationship and you can build a great rapport, and then you have a new principal or you have a new director of programs, and then everything stops. So I do think, and I advocate for DCPS Central Office to take a larger position in terms of placing organizations into schools, because Aurora, like before, when I first met Aurora,
Years ago.
she had to send emails and emails and emails to try to get us in even with her help, we still were unable, and not because we weren't doing the program yet. We were there, but it was just, we had to be the block down the street, and students had to come because it was a process P&B updated to allow for greater flexibility, to allow for transparency, so that it feels fair across the board, and it's not just, oh, well, you know this person and that person called, so you're gonna be at this school because we called the principal and made the principal say yes. So I think it's kind of a thing to work on, and I do agree that being a part of the planning and collaboration committee will help towards that, and I hope that is a goal that we focus on as part of the commission as well.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioners?
I have one more comment, just in piggybacking on your comment, that one of the other staff members in the Office of Family and Public Engagement, which is where Thomason works, but on the partnerships team, has been trying to cultivate partnership fellows in schools who really understand how to work with partners more effectively. And there's now a cadre of, I don't know, maybe 20 of them at different schools. We're hoping that that might help to kind of, with the turnover and all, to have people who might be longer serving in a school to really get to know the partners, build those relationships, and make things easier across the board. So it's something that they're trying, because I think it is a challenge. Having to go back to a school year after year and introduce yourself like you're new and you're not is very, it's aggravating, honestly.
Matt, can I just address that, if you don't mind? The partnership coordinator inside the schools, the challenge with that is that they're under the control of the principal.
True.
So even if a partnership coordinator is saying, you know, this has been a great organization, the incoming principal
Right.
is going to shake up everything. I mean, it just, you know, take Walood, for example, within 5 years, 3 principals.
Yeah.
The partnership coordinator stayed through 3 principals, but the organizations that were in school did not.
Yeah.
And it, organizations come and go with the principal. Whereas if there was a partnership that was mandated at a higher level, that the principal cannot, the partnership coordinator cannot supersede, then that would be, you know, it's almost like, you know, the addressing the need of the whole child, during school time and after school time. If everybody is on board and working as a partner, the agencies of it. Yes, ma'am, thank you.
We're gonna do roll call. Margot Berkey.
Present.
Tisharna Crown. Vanessa Gerardo.
Present.
Gary Hill.
President.
Darby Hickey.
Present.
Cheryl Hamilton. Valerie Brown. Mark Hecker.
Here.
Renell Holland.
Present.
Trayvon Kinney.
Present.
Giselle O'Neill. Commissioner O'Neill, are you on the phone? Commissioner Peacock is on his way. Commissioner Peeler is excused. Aniza? Commissioner Bryden is excused, and Commissioner, oh, that's right,
I'm
sorry.
here.
Sorry, Maggie. You're here. Margaret Siegel is excused. And Aurora Steinley. Present. And Mila Yogan here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's right. 12 commissioners present. So we have quorum. So 9 is required for quorum. So we can officially. With that, can we get an approval for the agenda, which you should have in your packet?
Move to approve the agenda.
Who was that, Holland?
Approved.
Thank you. Second? Kenny? Any discussion on the agenda? Those who approve the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any of those abstaining?
Aye.
Oh, I think that was approval. Anyone abstaining? The motion carries unanimously. The agenda so moved. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. You can review the minutes in your packet. Are there any changes or revisions? If not, can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Motion to approve the minutes. Commissioner Steinley making the first motion. Is there a second? Commissioner Crump? Those who approve the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose? Anyone abstaining?
I abstain.
And that is Colin, thank you. One abstention, but all approved, so the motion carries, majority, and the minutes are approved. The updates from the Office of Out of School Time Grants and Youth Outcomes. Part of our time is given to the DC Policy Center, so we have some just quick updates briefly from the office. I'm going to turn it over to Deborah real quick.
Hi, a couple of very quick updates for everyone. Summer 2019 grant competitions were released to the grantees, to the applicants. There were 84 applications that we received. It's in your packet, the summary sheet that was sent out. 56 organizations were awarded a total of $4,866,694. 14 of those were new organizations that had not been previously awarded by the OST office. And that was in 3 different competitions. It was the Summer Strong, the Small Nonprofit, and the Coordinating Entity competitions, which we had previously discussed.
Yes. Can you ask?
Yeah.
For the,
Uh,
go ahead.
For anybody on the phone, if you can mute your phone, the background noise makes it difficult to hear. Thank you. the other thing, the other high-level information is that today, two school year requests for proposals were released for school year 19-20.
Oh, sorry. Any questions on grants?
And the best way to get information about when those are released is still the newsletter and things, right? I think we've gotten, you guys have such great coverage with your newsletter now, but every time we get like one or two people who call us after the deadline. So if there is anyone who is not aware of that, make sure that they're also not only aware of it, signing up for OST's newsletter, because that's a really good way to know when the competitions are announced.
Yes, so we withheld the newsletter so it can be sent out tomorrow to include the RFP. So it is delayed by a day for that reason. Commissioner Darby, did you have a question?
Yeah, is that the earliest you put out the school year?
No, actually, it was,
But close.
Set a
But
high bar
good.
for
Close.
ourselves.
Still very good. Still very good.
We continue to wait until after like the budget is the draft budget is proposed, so we have an idea of what the funding is. Which
That makes a lot of sense.
so that we're not putting hopes out there or
Right.
putting, so we actually wait till the draft budget is out there and then hope for, of course, all of this is pending council's approval of the budget, but it gives us at least something to work with that is out there.
and there is a third that is being released as well for invitation only to previous school year and summer grantees.
Essentially a continuation.
It's a continuation for a year round, if you program year round.
So, and I'll just jump
Great.
off of that.
I
It's
just
gonna
want to
come
say
later.
it's great. But
Yeah.
it's still
So-
early, even if it's not the early.
Thank you for the timing. So what Deborah was alluding to, for grantees who received the school year 18-19 school year grant award and the summer 2019 grant award, so they received 2 grants from us in FY19. So to reduce the burden of reporting and writing proposals, what we had drafted is an invitation-only competition for FY20 called a full year grant. In which they're putting for their proposal for both school year and summer into one budget and one reporting cycle, and then they only have to write one RFP for the year. So we had floated the idea with a couple nonprofits. They said, absolutely, if we don't have to report 2 separate budgets, 2 separate RFPs, and allow us to share the data. So we are testing this sort of year round with the group who we had funded only in FY19 with both grants. But there's still a large group of nonprofits that impact. So that competition will total about $4.5 million. And that will include school year and summer. So we'll have a commitment, at least they know that they have summer grants already, so they can recruit. And the idea is that they will start, the plan is, hopefully in line, that they can open up their enrollment at the same time DPR and DCPS does, so that we know sort of largely earlier in the year what slots are available. So that is something new for FY20 that we're excited about.
How many people will be in this, New York district in this cohort?
Off the top of my head, that I don't, it's an invitation only, and to be honest, I don't know the number off the top of my head, so I apologize. Of the 80, it's about,
It's either 26 or 36, I can't remember.
I think it's more than 30, I thought it was more than 36.
Is that information part of this document?
It is not, it was for FY20, so it would be part of the new FY20 RFP.
Sorry, are you saying out of the 80, is 80 organizations eligible to apply for invitation?
No, this is invite only, so these are only the grantees to receive both grant awards in FY20, but not for the CBOs, because the CBOs can actually apply for more money in the other competitions if they choose to. We didn't want to cap them at saying, well, both of your totals equal 50, when they may want to apply for the other competition.
Sorry, I think I said the word continuation, but is it competitive, or is it like if you performed well in your FY19 both grants, then you are essentially like?
This is competitive, but if in the event they are not awarded, they would still get a continuation award. So this just shifts the cohorts. So the cohort 1 grantees, there was a large group, so what we're trying to do is shift the multi-year, so each competition has about the same number of organizations. So this will pull another subset of group into a different competition. Does that make sense? So we're trying to, just like you would stagger boards, we're trying to stagger the competitions a little bit. And so that each competition, and also with the money, there is some staggering. So any given year, it doesn't impact as many organizations if there are changes to the grant awards.
And last question for me, what was the maximum?
This one would be 225, so it's the combined total of what the max would have been for both the school year and summer. Any other questions? So one other comment related to grants, just and then I'll turn it over to Polly. This is taking a little. Two things just in terms of the RFP that we wanted to highlight related to grants in FY20 is that we tested this question last competition around describe the target population, making sure that the grantee describes the population served is at risk as defined in the RFP. So the at-risk definition of that homeless, foster, TANF, or the academic behind. So we're asking grantees in the the school year OST competition to define that and how they may measure that. So just getting a little bit closer to that at-risk definition. And then the second piece that the commission wanted to raise was how the program defines structural racism and how the organization works to dismantle those systems. So that question we had tested in the last competition. The reviewers really liked it, so we left that question in this competition as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Kevin for a quick quality update.
Okay. I'll do a quick quality. You definitely have your report within your packet as well for the quality initiative for this year. And there's a graph up on the slides right now, so I think that's probably where the most focus we can lie on. We have actually, which is interesting, 2 years worth of data now in regards to the programs that's been participating in the Youth Quality Initiative. 19 of the 23 were from year 1 moving into year 2. So there, of course, we had the extra addition, which created the 23 programs overall. If you're looking at the graphs then, the first 2 are year 1, year 2 self-assessment data, which is the program assessment data that they've reported about their programs themselves during their component of the assessment. And then the last 2 graphs are the external assessors. As you can see across the board then, between the safe environment, supportive environment, it pretty much maintained about the same quality perspective from both the self and the external. Although with your supportive, year 1, external was a little bit higher than your second year, and there could be a little glitch with that, we're not really sure as well. And it also could be the addition of the extra programs that came into cohort 2 as well that might have made that a little bit trickier in regards to why this external went down somewhat. Interaction engagement is always kind of be the more difficult because it's the top tiers of your best practices within quality. But I kind of like where we were in regards to year 1, a little bit higher in their self-assessment, but their external assessments came in at a pretty good level overall. But I think our year 2 is a better, it's a better snapshot of where I think really programs lie. So we're kind of getting to a good part, or a good start. It's starting to see a little bit of a pre-post component. One addition I think that'll help for next year is that we have an RFP that we have out for a quality technical assistance consultant. And I think once that individual is on board and is able to really work more hands-on, on-site, and in the field with programs, I think we'll start seeing a lot better outcomes overall. But those are the big highlights for this year with the quality. They're wrapping things up. They're still working on their performance improvement plans. And then we're still providing, of course, any quality workshops that they're interested in to help support their endeavors as well.
Grantees are required to have their own internal evaluator or external evaluator for that.
Right. This year and even for next year when we go in with the grantees overall, we did actually provide all grantees the opportunity to attend what we call the Program Quality Assessment Basics Training So it was part of their requirement as a grantee, and then they did do a pencil to paper self-assessment, the same one that we provide for our quality programs as well. But the quality initiative currently is still voluntary in regards to grantees or programs that's interested in going through the full-fledged initiative.
The reason why I ask, because that will help to determine the quality of the data. You know, because some of them may not know.
So the
that
data you're
from
seeing
that.
is only those who have both a self and an external. So all grantees were required to do a self-assessment, well, most eligible grantees. Just because it's not determined turn programs or individual, so eligible grantees were to do a self, but that data is separate. That is not included in here.
That's not it.
And to anyone who was in the pilot, who chose to participate in the pilot, you guys provided the external.
Yes.
So,
Any other questions related to quality? And then the only other update we have for the OST office is the budget. For those who've seen it, the budget for our office has a small decrease of $400,000. That impacts grants by about $170,000, and then the rest of that impact is with the Institute for Youth Development. We're actually quite excited about the budget because more of the money is actually reoccurring. So last year we had about 10.2 as a reoccurring budget. So this year what they did was up that to about 13.8 or 13.7. That will be part of the reoccurring budget for our office. So we did get a small cut, but overall to have that as a recurring budget was helpful. So that is where the budget stands for FY20. So the grants will, there's a minor cut with grants. It impacts about 75 slots, but we do not see that as a major concern since we have stabilized the funding to have that recurring was good news. Any questions with the budget? Okay, then we're going to turn it over to DC Policy Center to present on the funding landscape, which you have the first few pages of. We did not print the appendix, but you had the full copy sent to you, and it is available online.
Probably there on because I'm terrible with these things. Sorry, it looks a bit funky on this computer, but hi everyone, my name is Yeshin. I am with the DC Policy Center. My colleague Catherine and I, this is our second dive into the out-of-school time programs space, so I'm really happy to share with you some of our findings. I know that you have a lot of things to cover, so I'll try to keep things short and sweet, focus on some of the things that I think are more sort of like new in this analysis than some of the other stuff that you may already know quite a bit about. So last year we presented to you a needs assessment and we looked at the existing seats of OST programs, both in public spaces or provided by DCP as public providers and by CBOs. And we looked at what the need might be, looking at the characteristic and did some sort of a gap analysis. At the time, we estimated that about 33,400 children and youth attend out-of-school time programs, and about 15,000, at least 15,000 attended summer programs. Our number for the 33,400 includes the Summer Youth Employment Program and some of the programs at the OES, which is more workforce development. I mention this because you'll see that it actually makes a big difference in like the top number, and it can be a bit of a shock because it's the Summer Youth Employment Program within there. So this time we're back looking at what we call a public expenditure review. So what we did is look at all the sources of funding that go into subsidized programs. So we're not looking at programs that receive no subsidy, we're looking at subsidized programs. And then we also looked at how all that money is spent. We sort of separated our universe into public sphere where the money can be tracked much easier through the DC district source system, although some of that money goes to private providers, I mean the CBOs. And then we also looked at sort of programs offered by government agencies compared to programs CBOs when we look at the expenditure side. Just very quickly, so when we think of sources and uses of funds, so where the money comes from, where the money is spent, you have on the public side federal grants and local appropriations. And here in this chart, I kind of went through everything that we could identify in 2016, 17, and 18. Because we had public data for 3 years when we started working on it. And obviously 19 is different because we expanded some of the programs. But so on the federal grant side, we have obviously the 21st Century Learning Center grants and federal workforce grants, which go to DOES programs. Medicaid transfer was just a little bit of money that we identified supporting out-of-school time programs, mostly probably in the context of special education. Title I, big deal. Title II, not as big of a deal. Title II, if you remember, is money feds give us so we can hire more teachers. So some schools have used some of that, but very small amounts, not every year. The more consistent stuff that we get is local appropriations. So we get grants supplementing the 21st Century Learning Center grants, and then OST, obviously the money that comes out of OST. Some of the purposeful funding at BCPS goes to pay for out-of-school time programs. We suspect that charters too, it's really hard to track them. And then there's direct program funding to Department of Parks and Recs and DOES for summer and sort of like summer youth employment programs. On the private side, we have basically income CBOs generate for themselves. These are user fees and fees charged to families, service fees charged to schools if you, for example, provide services to a charter school and in return get a fee. And then rental fees, sometimes entities will rent their space if they have space, very rare, but some income. You have obviously the big source grants and donations coming from foundations, corporations, individuals, and then all kinds of fundraising revenue is the in-kind stuff that CBOs get. On the uses of funds, we basically have public and private use sources again, and in the public sphere, it's the charter LEAs, DCPS, DOES, and DPR making the decisions on how to spend their money. It goes to after school, summer youth employment, summer camps, and youth programs. And on the private, and we have CBOs and private service providers mostly engaged in after school and out of school time programs. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. This is to show how complicated just the funding part is, but let's sort of dive into the amounts. So 2017, we were able to identify $97 million. It seems like a big figure, but remember that about 20 million of it is summer youth employment programs, another 10 goes to other youth programs at DOES. So what we have found is that the bread and butter of out-of-school time programs, things that you see in the after school and during summertime, is really getting somewhere about $60 million. And also remember, this is 2017, 2018, at least the public side went up a little bit because there was a big infusion of funds to the out-of-school time program office here. See, just a few things that I want to share with you. Here the CBOs, you can see that of their budget, about 3/4 come from private sources, fundraising, foundations, and the foundations are the sort of like the really foundation of this funding. And then DCPS, DOES almost entirely relies on public. These two little shaded areas here for DOES, it's a bit of private money. They get grants from some foundations, which is very small. And this little shade is whatever fees families pay for summer programs.
Just can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is there, do you guys do any analysis or comparison of sort of the breakdown between private support of CBOs versus public in other markets?
In other markets, meaning
Like,
outside of the District of Columbia? Yeah. No, I mean, it's a very good question. It's our CBO data, I'll get to that in a second. It was a survey that we conducted, and then we checked it through some other data, the Summer Strong applications, and these are estimates. So to do that in other markets, we will have to go through either some sort of systematic coverage of CBOs through their own version of out-of-school time programs, which may or may not be there. Polis Foundation has an expenditure side, sort of like what does it cost to provide quality services at the out-of-school time space. We looked at it very carefully, but we couldn't really drive that data with what we found. DC providers are really efficient compared to what they say we should be spending.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll very quickly go through this. Obviously, federal grants are a small portion compared to the local sources. Again, remember, local sources include the $30 million that goes to DOES, Summer Central Program, and things like this. What I really want to jump to is the private money, because I think this is the more sort of like news coming out of this study. As far as we know, no other organization has surveyed CBOs to see where they get their money and how they spend it. So we basically sent some questionnaires. We thought that we covered about 90% of CBOs because this is our second time around working with them after the capacity. And then we compared it to data from Summer Strong programs. The paper is a long appendix telling you how we got there. But based on those, we think that about foundation grants account for about $15 million of funding that goes to CBOs. Then corporate donations are about $9.5 million. You see the Summer Strong gives us, a little bit higher, but similar numbers. And then events and fundraising is another $2.9 million, not $9 million according to CBO questionnaire. That came out very high in the Summer Strong, but I think it's because of the way the questions are asked. And in-kind donations is about $2 million, fees charged to families $1.5 million, and then service fees charged to schools another $1.8 million. Summer Strong shows us a different number, so we kind of have a range of what the CBOs collect. I wanted to sort of like spend a minute on this, the role of foundation grants and in the overall CBO sphere. So here, this is organized by how much foundation funding in CBO gets. Here, no foundation funding, and here they get actually $500,000 or more. So these are like big players. Nearly half of the CBOs that we looked at actually have no foundation funding, and they are only about 6% of the revenue that CBOs collect. And when you look at this higher end, so we have 5 plus 3 plus 2 is about 10, that's about 25% of the CBOs that we work with actually account for nearly 90% of the funding. So this is just another way to say that 90% of foundation funding and 75% of total funding. This is a way to say that CBOs that have strong support from foundations, they can leverage that money to get other things, corporate donations. When you have resources, you can raise money. They probably spend more time preparing applications for the government funds. So foundations play a really strong role. Why is this important? Foundations can be very devoted, or they can basically say, that was our last 5-year plan, and now this year we're going to focus on workforce readiness or something. So they could be very finicky. They could also, when they see that the DC government is putting money on out-of-school time programs, they could just say, okay, we're going to go somewhere else where there's more need. I mean, they did fill in a great gap during the Great Recession, as far as we understand from our conversations with the CBOs. But now things are good. They may walk away. But I'll get back to this in our recommendations slide.
Question. Did you see any pattern in the type of organizations that were able to acquire foundation funding? Are they all of a certain genre of CBO in a way?
They tend to be larger. They tend to have mostly after-school programs. There's a lot of information in our report on these cross-sections. just look in the appendix, we put them in the main report and it was like 150 pages. So we kind of carried them out to the appendix. On the expenditure side, just a bit of terminology. We talk about programmatic expenditures and non-programmatic expenditures. In the DC government, overhead is very different from CBOs. In the DC government, agencies don't even see the overhead. You know, you don't pay for your space, you don't pay for someone to do your finances. Okay, agencies will pay for the CFO's office, but they're not, like their fiscal office, but they're not gonna pay for the overall SOAR. They're not gonna pay for all of that stuff. Whereas CBOs have to pay a lot for a lot of those things. And we call those non-programmatic expenditures overhead, money spent on things that indirectly support the programs, not directly. And here are the public providers. As you can see, here the gray stuff is salaries, wages, and benefits. In the public sphere, salaries, wages, and benefits are about 40% of expenditures. And then these are all services, stuff we buy to put in classrooms largely, right? Or stuff we buy to put in the programs, to deliver the programs. And the fixed costs are tiny. There is no personnel. There is like, nobody needs to buy a typewriter or a ream of paper. It all goes from like some other budget. So this is sort of like the power of a big organization. You can basically budget all of this stuff elsewhere. It's not that there's zero cost in terms of cost. It's that to the agencies that deliver services, there's nothing. I'll show you the picture for the CBOs, which is very different. So programmatic and non-programmatic. Top side, we start with say salaries, wages, and benefits. It's really not that different from the government side. But we have non-personnel costs much lower, and then they have spent some money for space, about 2.6% is just space for programs. And together, this is about 65% of their expenditures are programmatic. Remember that in the government side, that was 98%. Fixed costs were just only 2%, right? Here we have fixed costs going up to 35%. There is a lot of overhead. These are the accountants, these are the finance people, these are the fundraising people. These are the people that make things happen, but they are not in the classroom. They're not delivering programs. Yes?
Was there a ceiling on salary?
Did it come up? Yeah. We inquired about the ceiling on sort of like where the fundraisers allow them to use the funders allow them to use money, but it never occurred to us. It's a good question. I don't know. Yeah.
I know you guys had some really interesting breakdowns of a bunch of these different graphs, but I can't remember if this is one of the ones that's broken down by organization size or anything.
Yeah, we did all of these things by organization size as well as the areas they're engaged in. And we can, certainly if you have other like cross sections in mind, just shoot us an email.
Yeah, I think you guys did it, Mike, before I encouraged folks to check that out.
It was dizzying. I think it was like, I can't do it.
Question, the fixed cost, that's at 35%, that's the same thing as the indirect cost?
Yes.
Wow.
It's a lot. So programmatic costs, I wanted to show you that salaries, wages, again, are 73% of programmatic costs. This is how it varies by type of service: academic, arts, business, general. These are all kind of pretty similar. General starts getting lower because you can probably do this with less specialized staff. Sports tend to be cheap. I suspect it's like my son umpires, so probably a lot of like high school kids in there. And then other, we just don't know what they are. They just didn't fall into one of those categories. This is all the operating costs. This is the program costs. And then these are the overhead costs for CBOs. Again, salaries, just the people to run these things are about 56% of their expenditures, just, of their fixed costs or non-program expenditures. But they also have to pay computers, legal stuff, that, all that back office stuff that the CPS or DOES or departments of the Parks and Recs don't have to really worry about. Okay, so this is essentially the challenges faced by providers based on the input we got from CBOs and government providers. Largely, there was quite a bit of difference in how the government providers, we talked with DCPS and, did we talk DPR? No, just DCPS, so I should say. Again, very different way to run these programs, but I think the staffing capacity and stability came through very strongly in both of them. Challenges in expanding administrative capacity, this is largely a CBO issue. They have a very big problem with that. Revenue constraints, both. Never enough money, and I think, you know, it's changing. Remember, we were talking about the 17 budget and 18 budget at the time, and it did change quite a bit in 19. Fluctuating expenditure trends, basically then not knowing how much they're going to pay for space is the translation for it. Space comes out as a big issue, inability to secure more space due to rising costs, matching specialized programs with participants. This is more of like an attraction thing. So these were the challenges we heard about. Here are the recommendations based on what we heard and also what we kind of found out. This kind of stuff, the public expenditure review, they should be diagnostic tools of identifying efficiency gains, equity issues, and stuff like that. We're not there yet in terms of data. And I think it would be important to collect data and to have more analyses on identifying funding trends. I think, going back to my earlier point about the funders being finicky, I think DC government has a really good start in terms of having a program, office dedicated to it. It would be really good for the government to cultivate these relationships. So you're talking with CAREFRITS, you're talking with, I think there's a handful of foundations that are very deeply involved, but I know that some of those are writing their plans next year. I work with them for my organization, and if they say, okay, this year it's going to be immigration, so we don't care about this issue anymore. So I think it's really important that for this office to cultivate those relationships. And also there's a lot of, they give a lot of money, community foundation we spoke to, we've asked them, so who do you give money to? They weren't really able to tell us who they give money to, because they kind of think of this space different from how you think about it. They fit it under, Wallace Foundation, very clear, very close in their vision to OST as you think of it, but Community Foundation doesn't think of it that way. CAREFRITS doesn't necessarily think of it that way, so I think working with them closely will help. I think this bit about opportunities to help funders and providers share resources and build administrative capacity. For example, having an accounting like your part-time, what's that? I always hear it on NPR, your part-time controller. So having a resource for CBOs so they don't spend 35% of their resources on accountants and lawyers and things like that. So it would be interesting to think of a model where there's food services and kind of, you don't need a fiscal agent anymore, you have these food services, but this accounting company is your fiscal agent in some ways. I think there's some probably, especially programs similar in their funding structure can benefit from that quite a bit. Balance organizational efficiency with families' needs. This sounds like a lot of blah, 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 but what we mean really is that some of the constraints on the organizations actually end up with programs where families are not always finding what they're looking for. Those of you in the CBO business probably can express this far better than we can ever do, but this has come twice now in our conversations with the CBOs. And then this bit, this is really important. I'm sure this is not news to you. Just like we have a serious problem in the childcare space where the salaries are low and it's hard to come to DC and provide services, and that's a full-time job. This is even more problematic. DCPS has told us that they call paraprofessionals. They don't have always a difficult time, but it's very sensitive to if the employment conditions get better, they lose lots of people. I think almost all CBOs we have spoken to have identified staff turnover as a serious problem. These are not high-paying jobs, so I think, and also some of them are of short duration. Maybe sharing staff, maybe having employment hours, pools, and things like that can help with the situation. And with that, I will ask.
Take questions. Any questions from commissioners? There's a lot of information in the report. We wanted to make sure we brought out the DC Policy Center so you can ask them directly if there are some questions during the presentation. So thank you. If you have follow-up questions, please email them to me. I'm happy to collect them. So feel free to send them to us as you dive deeper into the report, and or we can always ask you guys to come back. Is that possible?
Yeah, of course. And Catherine and I are always here. Her email as well as mine are in the presentation. I've left some copies. We'll put it online as well. Just shoot us an email. There's the whole lot of other analysis we didn't put in the paper because I think it was like too long, but happy to share with our data and stuff like that with you.
Thank you. Lots of information. So take this information at the committee levels, and as we're thinking about the strategic plan, we're going to keep the agenda moving because it is 7:34, and I want to keep us moving. For the next part, we're going to talk about the strategic priorities. You have a document in your packet that has the draft strategic plan. In particular, you want to pay attention to the back pages, page 3, 4, and 5. This is new. So the first few pages of the strategic plan you had approved last August. And I had mentioned from the work plan that we would ultimately, by June, have a public document that would be approved for comment. So this is the draft of the strategic plan as you move closer to formalizing the plan for June for public comment and vote. And then the vote will happen in August of 2019. So starting with the strategic priority for funding and capacity building, I'm going to ask Commissioner Crump to provide a few words. If you're ready about the funding and capacity building and your section and your overall goals, just at the very high level.
That's great.
So it's
I wasn't ready.
You're the first one that's on page 3.
Really?
Yes. That's how the report was. It was funding capacity building was first.
Okay. Awesome. So we met Deborah in March, right? I don't know the exact date. Yes. We met in March, and we discussed their rundown, strategic priorities. It was really good. One thing that we really focused on was that we know that we need to dive deeper into is youth voice. So our plan and goal is to really hone in on that during spring break. So we're going to try to get young people out to the table to be a part of the committee and get their input on how it affects funding and capacity building. So our next session is scheduled for Monday. Great. And our focus is on supporting organizations with access to funding, focusing on equity and distribution of funds to at-risk youth. We are still,
I'm just making sure.
so, our other two priorities, we are still working on developing them to include the specifics around it, but engaging OST participants in grades 4 through 12, which is what we kind of are going to prioritize for our next meeting by bringing young people to the table, and then gathering input from individuals who support OST participants in grades K through 3, meaning we didn't want to label that just parents because there's other supportive people in the environments around them. So those individuals that support K through 3, just like with the SAO, they can't necessarily speak for themselves. as of now, so we know parents within their households and other supportive environments, so we're looking for some for feedback as well. And then using some of that data from the SAOY, and we're definitely gonna be really focusing in on this DC Policy Center information now that we have a little bit more data on it, so we're really excited about that. And then we're looking forward to collaborating with a lot of the other committees, because we think that funding and capacity building is building into those other committees as well, priorities.
And that's our action. So are there questions or comments about the overarching goal? So the idea for the strategic plan are those 4 items. So the goals for this committee, or this strategic priority, is to focus on supporting organizations with access, focus on equity, engaging youth of the different age groups, and or the individuals who support youth. Are there comments or questions about those 4 changes, wordsmithing as we get closer to a public document, or what it means?
I don't have any words for things because I don't think this needs to be specified, but I imagine the first bullet under support organizations' access to funding, building the capacity, particularly given that report around the philanthropic side, and that's where I was kind of interested in the breakdown of work size or other things, because I think there's just so many takeaways from that report that tells us which orgs have what types of capacity now to either learn from each other and or that we can ensure that the institute is a part of building that capacity. So that this all looks good to me.
Other questions or comments? Are these 4 goals what this commission likes, supports, anything missing?
I can support this. Yeah, I guess when I looked at all of them, I thought maybe we needed, as a full group somehow, to dig in a little more deeply into what really fits where, because it seemed like there was so much interrelationship between the bullet points on the different committees' work. And I just want to be sure that we're not somehow all doing the same thing under a different heading. You know what I mean? So that's my overall comment, is that just really refining this so that we know that funding and capacity building is focused on that, and looking at how does youth voice fit in there, because youth voice needs to fit in pretty much, they're tracked. Anyway, I just felt like.
So do you have you, so that's the point of today's conversation, right? Is so that we're looking at all of these 4 things holistically. This is why metrics were pulled out, and that there were bullets moved around against different committees to make sure, even though like the funding and capacity building provides advice and guidance, the work will actually happen from the quality committee, because funding and capacity does not do professional development or technical assistance. And so some of the work in there, they guide it, and the whole strategic plan is actually guided by the commission overall. So in general, it's looking at the overarching goals and the strategies underneath it, the bullets, the strategies themselves, what will be done. It may not actually be done by those committees. The idea is they will be tracking what is done in those committees, but they can also track what's happening in other committees as well. This is a holistic strategic plan. It is not just to be siloed for that reason. A lot of the crosswork, it's sort of, for now, it makes sense because quality will be doing the work around capacity building. They would be tracking if they have access to the data that fits in their workflow and implementation. So there's a lot of even a lot of the things from coordination and collaboration. And so I think every commissioner in this room will know, like, yes, we've talked about cross-sharing or making sure information shares across committees. But if there's a specific move or a red line, we do need to make those, either in between the next few months or at the committee level, as this document gets final for public vote, like for the vote and what will actually be published.
And one thing I will say about the funding capacity building committee, and we had a long list of a lot of things that were crossing into other committees. So one of the things that we discussed was, as commissioners on the committee, all of us taking a role to, for instance, Commissioner Hill is going to go to the planning and collaboration committee to make sure those capacity building and funding, priorities that we have are crossed, so all of us from the funding and capacity building committee, what we plan to do is to sit on those other committees, have a member from each team, because we've had so much cross, like Deborah had long lists of things, and then people was like, well, they're gonna have to do that, and we're gonna, so it was a lot of cross, but, how we plan to really work on that is by being a part of those other committees, so we can say, funding the capacity building fits here, this is what we need to do.
The last two comments made me think a little bit about, like I think this time to hear the reports from each committee is extremely helpful, and I like the fact that you guys are making sure you're attending other years too. That's huge. But I wonder if it might make sense for us to build in some time, a couple meetings throughout the summer, I guess, to have, I don't know, 25 minutes of like a working session inside of a general meeting where if topics that have sort of bubbled up, we can, do some small group discussions to kind of get to the bottom of things, but just something to think about. Because I imagine this interest in and spirit and need for collaboration is going to continue as we go on.
In terms of the capacity building, how are we going to determine where the needs are and what specifically is going to address?
So with capacity building, one of the things that we were waiting for was this report, because we didn't have any data. We had spoken to organizations, specifically a lot of smaller organizations and some larger, but when we had spoken to them, capacity building, funding for capacity building projects was something that came up as a high priority. And being able to navigate that, because right now OST funding, one thing we did know because we didn't have this information was that there was not a lot of money for capacity building projects to do the capacity building work. So, and one thing that the organizations were not interested in was getting capacity building training and not being able to act upon it because they don't have the resources to do that. And then we didn't have this information. So looking at over our next meeting, what we plan to do is bring that information together and then kind of dive into what we can and can't do, because we didn't have any of that information, but we did get feedback from organizations in terms of capacity building opportunities and projects that they could participate in around the district and what their needs were.
And also, when we talk about capacity building, the last commission meeting, we talked about the 8 domains based off of the needs assessment. So we've already conducted a needs assessment of the small nonprofits. They were mandatory for them to take the assessment, and then it was optional for the other grantees. So we have some data in terms of what those, and there were 8 domains that we think about when we talk about capacity building. And the committee will continue to frame that as a way to think about capacity building. So some of the buckets were board development, communication, finance, and fundraising. So those are broad buckets of work, if that helps.
Because I think where the need is greatest is for, CBOs especially, that serve high school students or ODU for that matter, in terms of the quality of programs and the type of programming that they offer. We need to provide serious support in those areas. It's less challenging with the smaller kids, but more challenging with ODU.
Okay. My question for you would be, does that fit under capacity building, or is that a quality piece that you're talking about?
It has to do with capacity building too for the people offering services. In terms of support.
Will even serve as a difference in quality?
It has to do with quality too, but I also think that some of the people who are offering service in this area need support.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those clear connections, right,
Yep.
between them, like the one leads to the other and vice versa.
Exactly.
Yeah, and across the board, a lot of the work under quality in or the Institute for Youth Development does not stand alone. mean, you have multiple things that will cross over. I'm just trying to figure out if we put the document here, if we put it under quality because of who does the work. That's all. I'm going to jump to the quality committee. And again, you can talk about all of them, but I just want to move the agenda around. And I'm actually going to turn over the meeting to Commissioner Peacock, who walked in, who can chair the rest of the meeting. So we just moved on to quality.
Okay.
And you have that other stuff. And Commissioner Kim, you don't have that.
Okay. Hey, Commissioner Kenny, you ready to discuss the quality component?
I am, and I am pulling up the document now.
No problem.
Bear with me, guys. So we had a meeting about, I'd say we had to skip one because people's schedules didn't align last week, but we had a meeting about a month ago. We just went over kind of a 3-year plan, what it would look like in terms of defining quality, incorporating the youth voice, adding some support from different organizations, and we didn't really get into timelines, but we did get into what the success with those tactics would look like. So we really got into establishing a youth assessor corps. We thought that was going to be a vital part of quality, the quality strategic plan over time. And that was the goal there will be to actually have the youth go out to different CBOs and different organizations and actually take video cameras so they can be the ones who are, because they're within the organization, they will be the one videotaping the quality and, just the organization throughout the day. And that will be a way for us to define and kind of see what the quality of these organizations are looking like. We had many more, but that was one of the ones I got excited about because it was a way for us to incorporate the youth while also defining quality and kind of making it known that the youth need to be involved with, the quality committee. That was a way to get them involved. We did have, I think, 3 different applications for the quality committee. I have gone over them. At this point, I'm just narrowing it down to, I guess, who will be approved. And me and Kevin haven't talked specifically about that, but we'll go over that soon, more than likely at the next quality meeting. And with that, we'll narrow down who will be added to our quality committee. We have about 3 gracious candidates, so I appreciate them coming out to the last meeting that we had. Other than that, I think Kevin has the revised strategic plan in front of him, and if any of you all want to take a look at it, maybe Kevin can print it out for you or send it to your emails. I also don't have a problem with sending it to anybody's email as well. You guys get that?
Yes.
Any questions on the quality and the 4 goals outlined in the document? And I was able to put it up on the screen. Comments, questions, missing?
I have a comment. I love the idea of a youth assessment board. I just think that's dope.
Thank you. Kevin actually, he had a code at the time, but Kevin was actually a big part of coming up with that. We're going to get more into it as we move forward, but I think that'll be a way to add the youth in when it comes to monitoring what's going on in these organizations, and that way, they kind of have, we will make it like that would be a goal for the youth to shoot for in terms of who's able to get that job within the organization. So, like I said, it's just a way to incorporate them so they don't feel left out because, again, this is not really for us. We get caught up in the money and the finances and the bureaucratic process of it all, but it's about them and getting them prepared for what's to come.
All right, thank you. All right, Commissioner Crump, you ready for the
Oh,
funding?
no, sorry, we're going to outcomes.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
That's me, I think. The Outcomes Committee last met on March 20th. We also had a number of committee members join us. Just one has met the 2 meeting standard so far, but we've had 6 or 7 that have come to one. Most of the work in the first 2 meetings we've had is focused on what's been named already, sort of drawing the lines between our committee and how it connects to other ones. So definitely that will be an ongoing conversation for all of us, I feel like. We've sort of defined the buckets in how we'll talk about things, looking at the program level, the organization level, and the system level, and figuring out how do we support outcomes in all 3 of those areas. We also, so those are the 3 sort of columns you see up in the draft document there with some items under each. The 4th one is really how do we directly connect to the current needs assessment and any future needs assessments to make sure that that's funneling into how we're setting city goals. So to make sure that's sort of a feedback loop going forward. I feel like we're off to a solid start on the really high level stuff, and it'll be interesting to see as we get to more specifics, because we have, as Jeremy can attest, we get a lot of high level comments, and then how is this going to apply to me tomorrow? So figuring out how we sort of connect those 2 levels of things will be an ongoing challenge, but I feel like we're off to a solid start. Happy to answer questions if there are any, or sit in awkward silence for 5 seconds before we go to the next one.
Any questions or concerns? Ready for the coordination and collaboration?
Yeah, I know our chairperson did join us by phone for this committee.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I don't know if Maggie or I could do it.
Maggie, are you at the phone?
I am still here, but I think it will be clearer if Aurora just reads what I wrote.
No problem. Put my cover, Maggie, but try not to read. But so our committee has been meeting regularly, and actually one of the exciting things I think for us is we did have a few members who've been attending consistently, and so we have a couple of folks that will be voting members moving forward. So just to share those folks here. Tony Randolph from Teen Youth Summit, Daniela Grigoni, am I saying that wrong, from After School All-Stars, and Ellen Murden from BC Public Libraries have all been consistently joining us and being really thought partners for the conversation. So they'll be voting members as part of our committee, but obviously we'll continue to have meetings with more folks joining us as well. So then the pieces that have come out of that, you can see on the page, and we've set some strategic deadlines for these different tactical pieces. I think to the point that was made earlier, you do see some similar wording or terminology overlaps with different pieces, but I think in the specificity of the conversation, there are some distinctions in what this particular committee is taking on, what pieces of it, what tactics versus what other committees are taking on. And I think we had shared previously for this committee our top line stuff, so really just the bullets are new. But if anyone has questions or feedback on what we've added under the bullets, I'm happy to take answers or pass it to Maggie, maybe unsuccessfully.
Any questions or comments?
Just two things. Can you go a little deeper on define OST partnership for agencies? Just say more about that.
Yeah, and Maggie, feel free to jump in too, or actually Alex is also been facilitating for that committee. But yeah, go for it, Maggie.
So, and just so I'm clear, because there's a little bit of an echo, just a question around what we meant under the broad block of partnerships between government agencies and CBOs.
Yeah, where we had defined OST partnerships for agencies. I think this was how a partnership looks different in every agency, and it's not always even clear what the differences are. So part of it's just literally kind of making that all very explicit, and then I think looking at what it means and why, if the differences are meaningful, great. If we look across and some of the differences between partnerships and agencies are less meaningful, then there might be reasons to just align those. Is there another?
Now the other, that's what I was gonna, it was gonna be about transportation, but we don't know how much that's gonna be ongoing.
So if there's a bank statement there, consider transportation solutions. Because the committee to discuss it, they know it's a really large bucket of work, but they didn't want to lose it, so it's there as they think about it. And the strategic plan is for 3 years. The commission will review it annually. And then the work plan will have the details with the metrics and stuff. So this is sort of just a public document to keep it high level for people who may not be in the weeds to understand what's happening.
Can I backtrack a little, kind of now that we've gone through them all? One thing I feel like I'm not seeing, and well, actually I do see it a little bit, but I just wonder if we want to clarify it more and if it's in the right spot. Under outcomes, the last point is review data from the annual needs assessment and then focus on reducing the gap and ensure equity. Is that the right spot for that? I had always pictured that more under the funding question, but not to say it's mutually exclusive, but in the sense of, I guess from a demographic and geographic perspective, and maybe even, no, I guess age is a demographic. Okay, we have this gap here, we need more funds explicitly for that. That was always a role I was thinking of with the art committee of the funding and capacity, and I realize now that it's not exactly detailed there. Should it be?
So Darby, we have the second goal focus on equity and distribution of funds to at-risk youth. Would you like to see something different or more bullets there?
I think it might need another bullet
Okay.
to make it just a little more specific. And I really explicitly, maybe it's identify gaps for increased funding or for funding allocation or something.
Or could this gap be the number of people, the people who are being served? Because there may be people in youth and communities that are not being served, but
Yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
mean that the program doesn't have funding, we're just not recruiting them. Could that be a consideration?
Yeah, well, that might be the outcome side of it, right? But I'm thinking of there's literally, now my kid's school, there had to be a lottery for DC scores, and a lot of kids didn't get in. And that was, I mean, partially it's a capacity question, but hypothetically it was a slots question, right? If they had more funding, they could have provided more slots. Actually, that's probably a bad example because I don't know if that's true. But anyway, XYZ after school program at this place could have had more slots with more funding, but they didn't, and it's in this area that we know is lacking in.
So it could be like
Other
a waiting
options.
list, right? So it's looking at demand and gap, I think.
Yeah, look, I remember when before this body existed, DCIOA put together some really interesting data that was very just kind of gathered from here and there. That was like, here's the number of after-school slots at Title I schools in this ward. Here's the number at non-Title I schools in this ward, and the mismatch there. And then so you can look at it both within the ward and then across the city. And that's like the kind of thing I would think that the funding committee would look at and try to solve.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like a difference in which piece of their responsibility each committee's for. Like the outcomes committee is responsible for sort of elevating or looking at the appropriate numbers and kind of saying like, here's a gap and here's a gap. But then the funding committee would be the one to say that's a gap where funding is actually a big piece of the solution. And maybe to your point, maybe some gaps are related to some other kind of solution that's needed, like coordination and collaboration or something else, but I think it's fine to, I don't have a problem with the addition or
I
emphasis
see.
in that, but
That makes
some
sense.
of
No, I
these-
see what you're saying. I hadn't thought of it
Yeah.
that way. That's really
it's a little bit- I don't know if
helpful.
I'm reading too much into the specificity of what duty is delegated to the committee, but a couple of these, like, yeah.
Yeah,
like
of course there's overlap, but is there, maybe we need to put this, if there's a couple more words then we could put in the outcomes form to that, the way you just framed it was really helpful to me. Which I
like,
can't now
instead
repeat.
of focus, it's like, is identify and elevate, review data with a focus on identifying and elevating metrics that identify gaps and
Yeah, maybe like different kinds of gaps or something.
I think that's accurate, and in the outcomes committee meetings, I think, because there are all these pieces, right? So the needs assessment happens, that's not really our purview, but what we were saying was, make sure that then is used to create the citywide, some of our citywide goals. So that translation part, we feel like is us, and then how we respond to it is not us anymore.
Right, okay, yeah.
So just making sure that the needs assessment is used to feed goal setting.
Right.
Is what we think of as our job.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Gotcha.
And so I do think though the bullet that needs to be explicit around the committee or the focus on equity is defining the funding priorities.
Yeah.
That be something like just that explicit, that the committee is making those recommendations, like here are our priorities. So right now we continue to use award. They may identify other priorities. Would that work, Darby?
Yeah, so I think the third bullet, or maybe even the first bullet, should be define funding priorities
Yep.
to address gaps and promote equity. This was a very helpful conversation though. So I'm glad I posed my question.
Yes, and we are going over, so I hope we can take 10 more minutes. We have time and hours and location, and this ties to the, like, transportation as well. So what are the barriers, and if there was some alignment or common location. So those were some of the comments that came out of that discussion.
Would services be considered then?
Create support for common program structure and services. We can ask the committee. I said yes, but we'll bring it back to the committee. Other questions?
Well, yeah, thank you everyone for your feedback and suggestions. I'll be moving on. So next, just to mention the timeline for the strategic plan is June for the final draft for public notice, and August is the public vote on that. Okay. And also the next meeting for the governance committee is scheduled for May 9th at 6:30 p.m. at the same location. So that's kind of going over the general structure of everything. Anyone would like to come to that?
If you are coming, please let us know, because if we have too many commissioners, we have to make a public notice. Because if once we have quorum, it's no longer a committee, and there's a whole, we have to be the compliant, yes. So the governance committee, you received a calendar invite. It is open to other committee commissioners, but please let us know. We do put notice of the meetings in our newsletter and things like that, so people are aware. But there is we actually have to create a notice and things for if there's going to be more than 9 commissioners. So please.
Do we get notices or invite for all the committees?
You do not get notices except at this meeting, and then through the Learn 24 newsletter, we publish all of the committee meetings, so that so the invite only goes to committee members, so we can track. Otherwise, once we do know other commissioners are coming, we do then have to either cancel the meeting because we will have quorum, and that means you can vote and make actions, and so we want to be just compliant. Just my warning.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Holland, ready for the update on the discussion of the needs assessment committee?
Absolutely. So the needs assessment committee has met once toward the middle of March, I would say. And we had the president, Commissioner Hill, Commissioner Gerda, and we really started with a little bit of a general backup plan for like what we need to get done. So the goal of the needs committee is to make sure that there's a clear scope and goals for the needs assessment that will occur annually per legislation. We know that we need to pretty much finish the scope and goals for next year's assessment by the end of this fiscal year. So our goal is to make sure that we're set on that and deliver that to the office by September 30th. With the obviously goal of making sure the full commission has a chance to review and vote on and make sure that folks are in agreement with that scope ahead of September 30th as well. So we started out our meeting really just doing a quick overview of the two assessments that we previously done. I think both of those were presented at a commission meeting. Was it December or January? But it was, you guys have seen the most recent assessments. And we really just spend some time thinking about how we can go one more level down with how data is categorized, disaggregated, et cetera. So a lot of the information is provided in the existing needs assessment. They're based on ward designations, which we know, if we're really trying to get granular with how well we're serving young people throughout the city, that might not be the best way we separate our data, I guess. Just take ward segment, for example, like ward decline, not the same thing as Deanwood, like you guys get it. So talked a little bit about potential options for how we could begin to think about analyzing, collecting data. Things like police service areas. I mean, all of them have flaws, I'll put it that way. But there are a number of different ways that we can think about geographic area. If we're going to move away from ward and try to get a little more specific. But police service area, ANC, single member district, school feeder patterns, neighborhood clusters, census tracts. Again, none of them are ideal, but I know we're a little over time, but if anyone has strong reactions to this discussion point in general, that's something that I think is really going to be a big piece of how the needs assessment committee moves forward. So if we're not using wards as our geographic area designation, like what are some of the things that I guess the pros and cons of going with some of these other distinctions that are listed in ANC, school boundaries, census tracts, planning areas, or just coming up with zones ourselves, which I don't recommend. But all that's on the table. We want to start wide and then kind of narrow our schools as we get more input from folks. So any thoughts there? No need to sit in silence. People don't have any thoughts, but I want to go over this.
Questions or concerns?
I like neighborhood cluster.
Neighborhood cluster.
I just think it's one of the more organic ones.
What is it?
It's on that screen for you.
I see, but I mean, I don't know what
It's basically a way of, it's like a set of neighborhoods that are all kind of next to each other.
Yeah.
So it is arbitrary in a way, because eventually you'll have a border of two neighborhoods that are connected
Yeah.
still, but like you see there, like Columbia Heights, Mount Pleasant, and Parkview, right? Those all pretty much folks go in between those a lot, right? There's the logic there. North of that is like Crestwood, Petworth, and Wrightwood, I guess. So I don't know, just to me, it's not so tiny as like census tract can be, which can be super great, but maybe for our purposes is a little too small. but it still gets at the net. And then same with ANC can almost be two. ANC kind of could work, but I like neighborhood clusters.
But what else does the city use neighborhood clusters for? I mean, it's like, is there other data used by anybody else?
Oh, that's a really good question. Actually, that's a good thing for us to think about is what are the data we want to be gathering that would inform the needs assessment that would be also be gathered in that way.
And that's a good question. I'm gonna write that down for just follow for myself. I'm not quite sure how neighborhood cluster is used elsewhere within government, but it's a fantastic question. And just to Darby's latter point, like how are we going to specifically use the data and what sort of population we're going to focus on? We talked a little bit about some populations that are currently underserved, like young people with disabilities or things like that. How can we develop a needs assessment that is truly inclusive of all of the young people that this work should serve? So those are just some of the things we're grappling with. Again, it was our first meeting, and I am eager to hear thoughts if people have strong feelings either way about geographic designation. So thank you, Darby, for the neighborhood cluster suggestion.
And one of the reasons why this was one of the first questions, it goes back to the funding priorities. Right now, the funding priorities are defined by ward. And so as we think about sort of how we want to break up the data, and Darby was right, because census tract is too small. If we serve one kid in that, we can't report it. So you end up with a lot of data that says, we can't report on it because you can then identify who the child is, and so you have to roll it up to a level of data that makes sense. And so by having, how we want to look at the data from a district level will help us think about which data we're then collecting, because we may not get good data depending. So there is sort of like both, but this one was because of the last report only focused on ward, and so this committee then said, and it came up once in this commission meeting as we thought about, and I think particularly the funding and capacity building committee, ward is not quite right. And it happened in that committee as well, as they thought about how do we want to start defining the boundaries here as we think about it. And then the data we've broken down from that, the funding. So this is sort of a pretty big conversation to think through.
Be more opinionated and just keep saying that. I personally have a thing about tying youth services to MPD. Like, it's a thing. It just rubs me the wrong way for us to tie our analysis of this to the police district. So I'm more on there's a difference of one, I think, between the ANCs and the neighborhood cluster. 40 ANCs, 39 neighborhood clusters. It might just make more sense to look, because for me, the ANCs are even more granular. Like, you're batching neighborhoods together. I live in one of the ones that you mentioned, and to me, they're very different neighborhoods. Parkview, Columbia Heights, and Mount Pleasant are really different. Whereas if you tie it to the ANCs, then you're talking really about like the more specific communities.
That's great.
I don't know.
That's a great point.
And I would like our ANC people to be like connected to this concept too, and really thinking about these types of things. But anyway.
Yeah, that was one of the discussions that came up. Is like that's a really it's an existing infrastructure that we can sort of invest in this work, which I know the office only does in a lot of ways, but it's seamless in some cases. And the sentiment to your point about PSAs was shared.
Okay.
But we listed it here, but that wasn't a sentiment that was shared.
I had a question come in is the consideration for school cluster. And I'm not familiar with this. For the neighborhood cluster, the school cluster?
What would be the pros and cons, or what's the question?
No,
Is it a consideration?
Is it a consideration?
Is that the feeder pattern?
No, you guys describe. Can I call on a public member to clarify?
Please.
Okay.
A motion to do so.
So within the PSAs, there are schools that are clustered, So one might be, say, Ward 8, Anacostia, and the school that's next to it, I think is Kramer. And that other school is in the street.
Boone and Kitchen, both near there.
Are you talking about the feeder pattern? Like elementary, middle, high for that neighborhood? Or?
No, not the feeder pattern. Well, yeah, it actually is the feeder pattern, but they're not necessarily.
It's the
some-
physical, not the actual like
Right.
feeder pattern. It's
Got
the
it.
physical proximity.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they're clustered and assigned to a superintendent. So, you know.
Oh, so
that
you're talking about the
doesn't work.
DCPS.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
cluster.
Yes,
But we
yeah.
also
Got
have
it.
charters, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's, DCPS designation, we talked about that too, but, you know, that always begs the question about how we count for charters, et cetera, but, it's in the mix, I guess, is the easiest answer to the question. But that's, we've gotta get to the bottom of, sort of, you know, where we feel, is the right direction to go on this. And that's primary focus of ours, our next meeting. I don't want to be the guy that keeps it for all night. But our next meeting is going to be on Thursday, May 16th at the Golden Perry Library from 6 to 7:30. So all are welcome.
All are welcome under 8.
Yes.
Notify us if you're attending.
Yeah. So that was for the record. Like, and to the public readers, y'all are welcome to come.
Just come to an agreement, if you're the ninth person in the room, you just leave.
I like that.
I would suggest that a non-commissioner, which is like Yeshem or someone like from doing the report, because I think the most important thing is that this is meaningful and that we're able to look at the data in a more meaningful way. But I do think on the flip side of like what is possible, and she may have a good sense of where they ran into problems collecting the data, and that may then connect back to like the coordination collaboration committee. If we're not collecting data in similar ways that can then feed into these metrics, I think one of the reasons PSAs ever got on the table was because some data somewhere in the space was collected in that way. We'd love to move away from that, but as we pick other things, we should figure out, one, if we're going to make a push as a commission for a new way, it'll be new for probably somebody to collect data that way, and or if it's not new, where can we strategically pick among these sources if we have, you know, two equals that's already collected that way, it's a little more practical between the two.
No, that's it. Great. All set.
Okay, we'll move on. The next meeting date will be June 13th, again from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Before then, is there any additional business or comments that anyone would like to address? All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Holland, motion to adjourn? All right, great. Those who approve the adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, any who oppose? All right, motion carries and meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.